Back when I first started teaching, I did the advanced courses it was a junior high school actually, and advanced courses, it wasn't AP, they called it something else, my mind just went blank, but it was an advanced course in social studies, and so along with that came the responsibility of working with the junior historians. Well, working with the junior historians was really good, and part of that was having them do things for the community. And so one evening or one afternoon right after school, one of the mothers came in and said, listen, I belong to a group of people who work with the Battered Women of Lubbock, Texas organization, and we would like for you to help us with something. Now, this came just before Christmas time. And so I said, well, okay, what would that be? And she said, we need for you guys to come up to Battered Women's to the place where they stay, and you might bring lunch with you or something like that. But we want you to bring and put together emergency packages for them. And so I said, well, I'll talk to the kids, and they were just thrilled to death. They thought that was just going to be a whole lot of fun. But it was during Christmas, and it was actually after school during the Christmas break, during the holiday time. So kids were coming and going and all that kind of stuff. Well, we put together about 6 kids, 3 boys, 3 girls, something like that. And we went up there, and let me just say that when you do something like this, you find there's a great reward in doing something like this for people who can't do things for themselves in the first place. But secondly, you find out just how thin your good place, your happy place, your secure place is. Because we got there about 10 o'clock or so, and they said, well, we've got everything out of the cars and the trucks, and they said, well, we need all your keys. And we had to move the cars and trucks to someplace else because the women and the children in there didn't want somebody, an ugly boyfriend or a husband, coming up there and beating down the doors or all that kind of stuff. So it's a very secret place, and in fact, at the time, I was one of about 3 men in the whole city of Lubbock who knew where this place was. And so anyways, we did all that. We went in and whatnot, and the women and the children who were in there absolutely, they were destitute, but within 24 hours before this time, they were upper middle class kids going to high school, going to junior high school, elementary school. Their mothers belonged to the PTA or the PTO, whichever one it was, and they were just like the rest of us. And suddenly, in one evening, in one moment of their lives, they were scared of dying. So they grabbed their kids with whatever they had, and they got in their cars, if they could get into a car, and they left. Many of them walked from wherever their neighborhoods were in Lubbock County to this shelter. And all they had was the clothes, if they had clothes, because a lot of these ladies, frankly, they left in their nightgowns. They put a jacket on, and they grabbed their babies, and they left. And this was during the Christmas time. Now, for us, to be fair, we understand about Christmas, but that's a very special time for almost 100% of the people in the United States. And they had nothing. They had nothing. And they were, our little bags, we went to the store, and kids in high school, they went up and their parents bought in Walmart or in Kmart, you have the little cans and little bottles of hairspray and deodorant and little things of soap. They used to be like 50 cents. Now I think they're $1.50, but you know what I'm talking about. We got all that stuff all lined up, and we put it in little plastic bags, and we took it up there. And they were just thrilled to get that because they didn't have combs, they didn't have brushes, they didn't have toothbrushes, toothpaste, They didn't have any of that stuff. Now, these were people who had money, and then in just a moment, they had nothing. Absolutely nothing. And they were wondering, they were really wondering when their next meals were coming from and stuff. And we did serve lunch, by the way. I got 100 cheeseburgers from McDonald's. Yes, and 2 big jugs of orange juice. And the kids were thrilled to death. The mothers, well, okay. But, that's what we did. And we spent a better part of a day from probably 10 o'clock to around 4 o'clock there, handing these things out, talking to them and stuff. It was a very rewarding moment. It was a very good thing for our kids to do. And we did that for about 4 or 5 years. And I think Carrie's class went there, and then John's class did it the next year or the year after. And we did that 4 or 5 years. And then it kind of, just kind of petered out. It wasn't, they didn't really need us there at that particular time. I don't know why. But at any rate, it was a very interesting thing to do. It was a very good thing for us to do. And so my question to you today is, was that good enough? Was that good enough to be in with God? Is that the kind of good that He is looking for us to do? Is that all there is? Is that what we're supposed to do? Because many of the churches, they have excellent programs where they take care of battered women. They do Meal on Wheels. They have soup kitchens. They minister to people who have drug and alcohol problems, people on the street. They do that stuff, and they do a fabulous job of it. But when God talks about good or goodness, is that what He's talking about? Is that what we're supposed to be about? Well, I started in this little trek. I thought the first thing to do would be to get a really good definition of the word good. So Google is our friend on this one. According to Google, to do something good or good means something to be desired or approved of. Pretty simple for most of us, certainly for me. I got that. We can do that. But is that what God wants us to do? Is that all there is? Is that good enough? Is it? That's the big question. Well, in Hebrew, they have a word, tob, T-O-B. My Hebrew isn't very good. I hope that's the way it's pronounced. Yeah, you'll find out my Greek isn't any better. But tob, T-O-B, is the word. And tob is a Hebrew word that's used in the Bible with this kind of definition. It is things that are pleasant or comfortable. About the same thing, sort of, kind of, about the same thing. Is that what we're looking for? Is that what? Oh, see, because you don't have to turn there, but in Genesis 45, verses 18 through 20, we find the word tob there. See, Pharaoh is talking to Joseph, and Joseph has told him, hey, my brothers have showed up, and they need me to go see my father who didn't come, and Pharaoh says, look, get your stuff together, get all your family stuff together, go back to your father's house, get him and all of his stuff, and come back to Egypt, and I will give you the good of the land for your family, the best of the land. That's what they're basically talking about there. That's tob, all right? Now, a little bit later on in Galatians 5, in fact, we need to turn there. So go to Galatians 5 and we're going to start in verse 22. Galatians 5 and in verse 22, here we have the fruits of the Spirit. And here it says, in verse 22, it begins, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, the act of being kind, goodness, the act of being good, which is what we're talking about, faithfulness, the act of being faithful, gentleness, the act of being gentle, self-control. Against such there is no law. And so here we have the act of being good. And it is a different type of good. It is the Greek word argathopio, I think is the way it's pronounced. I'm sure someone will tell me that's wrong, and I apologize. But argathopio, it is the act of being good, inspired by God. Now that is as a little different side to being good. This is the act of being good inspired by God. I found some other definitions of the same word, and it is also known as, seen as, a virtue that is applied to persons who are opposed to bad, wicked, or evil ways. Anybody opposed to bad, evil, or wicked ways? Me. I don't know how good I stay away from those things, but I try real hard. But it is that kind of a virtue. In the King James dictionary, it says this is having a moral quality. Goodness has a moral quality required by God's law. So there is another part of being good, isn't there? There is another part that comes from God himself. It is a part that we have, that requires God's law. And that's a very important point. I have a Bible commentary, and it talks about the book of Proverbs. And in that it says the book of Proverbs often compares the lifestyle of the wicked versus the lifestyle of the righteous. It is good versus evil. That's what the whole book is about. All right? And it makes a very strong case for living by God's pattern. Oh, wait a minute. Not only is this quality required by God's law, but it also has his pattern of doing things. How does that work? How does that work? God's pattern, if you would, turn to Deuteronomy. We're going to bounce around here just a little bit. Deuteronomy 28, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 9. In Deuteronomy 28, verses 1 through 9, it says, "Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently," this is God talking, all right? Now it has come to pass that if you shall diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments, which I command you today, that the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come to you and overtake you, because you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city and in the country. Blessed shall you be the fruit of your body and the produce of your ground, and the increase of your herds, and the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks. Blessed shall your basket and your kneading bowl be. Blessed shall you be when you come in. Blessed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will cause your enemies to who rise against you to be defeated before your face, and they shall come out against you one way and flee from before you 7 ways. And so, if we obey God's laws, obey God's laws in the plan that he has for us, we can be blessed. That is a good thing. That is God's blessing. That is God's blessing. And so how does that work? Well, a little earlier in Deuteronomy, we find we have the Ten Commandments. And without turning there, the Ten Commandments, remember, the first four have to do with our relationship with God. And think about this for just a minute. And the last six have to do with our relationship to mankind. Isn't that a pattern? Do we see a pattern in that? Well, we can go through the Bible and we can find that kind of a pattern with our dealings with God. Same kind of thing. So that being the case, then, is there no good thing then in helping others? We know that we can go through this with God, and that is a good thing. But what about that? Go back to that original thing with helping others. Turn with me, if you would, to Matthew, the 23rd chapter. You'll probably beat me there. And in verse 23, here Christ is talking, and he's had some issues with some of the Pharisees and the scribes. And finally in verse 23, he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! For you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. You are blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel." See, there is the other part as well. The scribes and the Pharisees were so concerned about the tiniest parts of their tithe, but there was another part to that. And God says you should do one part and not forget the others. So God's goodness requires two parts. It requires obedience to His law, and it requires both Tob and agathopio. So you must do one and not forget the other. And that's the important point here, People today in this world have basically forsaken the agathopio type goodness, that act of obedience. The law is done away with. We don't need that stuff. We don't need to go there. We don't have to do any of that. Oh, okay. They do a really good job with the Tob type of goodness, but they have totally forsaken the other, and that is the problem. Okay, so this out of another Bible commentary, this type of goodness that has been talked about really is a type of goodness that comes from the heart, God's heart, and should come from our heart. Now, the word heart is in the Bible is basically used as a metaphor. The heart is that central place in our being. It is a central place of life and strength. And it basically encompasses one's entire emotional nature. So we are supposed to be obedient to God, do His will, follow His commandments, His statutes, and His judgments, because that's what we want to do. Not because we have to do it, but because we want to do it. And that's kind of the middle of that. So if you are volunteering for things, if you are helping out with natural disasters, and we've had people do that, and that's really a good thing. Meals on Wheels, we've had people who do that, and that is a good thing as well. We've even had somebody who has helped with battered women's shelters, and that was a pretty good thing. It's great learning lesson for me. All right. But if you find them, but with the first type of goodness, you may find your second type of goodness is far more rewarding. All right? And also, I would tell you, let us not forget the church. God's people have a lot of ways for us to help our neighbors. Tithe of the tithe helps people who don't quite have enough money to go to the feast, That's really a big deal. We've helped with people like that before, and they really appreciate having this one little opportunity to go to the feast and be with God's people. Our youth camps, they need to be funded. The church seems to do a pretty fair job with that. But we have there are people in the church who have children, and they're not cheap, to have kids. And sometimes there are families that can afford to send their kids to camp, but they can't afford the travel, or vice versa. And so, you find somebody and you offer to pay, we did that for about 5 or 6 years in Lubbock when our kids were teenagers and there were teenagers there. We sent probably 5 or 6 kids to camp. Their parents either paid for the camp and we paid for the trip, or vice versa. And you can do that. And there's a lot of good that comes out of that. You can also staff camps. They always need something. Now, fellas, does not have a bunch of guys show up with our fishing rods to go teach fishing, right? I'm sure they have enough folks for that, but there are places where they need people, and all you got to do is ask. All you have to do is ask. You can submit articles for church publications, and we have Foundation Outreach Institute, or International. I knew I was going to say that wrong. The FOI. And my understanding is that they are doing a coin drive today and something called a Hilltop Power Pack. I don't know what that is, but it's supposed to be for the community, so it's a good thing, right? And then finally, there's always prayer. There are people who need our prayers. They're in various situations, and I can tell you, as far as the Williamses are concerned, we've had some pretty dark moments, and we have been able to feel those prayers and the security that they give people, and you just can't. There's just no way of expressing how wonderful that really is. When people are praying for you, and we've known as well. So I would just tell you, kind of in closing this things up, we need to remember that God's good has 2 parts. There is the part where we go out and we help our people in our communities, people in our church areas, and all of that. But that isn't enough. What makes it enough is being good on the inside, obeying God's laws, His commands, His ordinances, doing what we're supposed to, and doing it because we want to do it, right? Not something we have to do. I think our young people today, things look so good. It's always, the people at this place or this other place, they are always out helping people. Well, they are. But they're missing an important part that we can take care of. And so we need to remember that outside the church, the people out there may seem like they have everything together, but they are missing this one person point. In Mark 7, don't turn there, but in Mark 7:7, Christ says, "In vain do they worship me." All right? And earlier in Mark, he says, people are going to say, when they're standing for God, "Hey, don't you remember? I did Meals on Wheels. I was at the battered women's. I did those things." And he's going to say, "Yes, but you left out the important part." Right? And so I never knew you. And that's going to be very sad. That's going to be very sad for them. God's good is 2 parts. And that is the pattern that he has. Make sure that you're working on both parts, and your good will be good enough.